today with David Wicks. David was a former colleague of mine at Seattle Pacific University for many years, and he was always innovative when it came to technology and finding the newest best things. So Northwest eLearn is our host for our conference this week. And if you have questions, you can post them in the Zoom chat. My colleague, Amy Spielmaker, is going to be housing the chat and making sure that all of the questions get answered. David is fine with you asking questions during our time together today, so we're not going to have a question and answer right at the end. It's being recorded and we're doing a live transcript, and it will be available on our conference website after it's been gone through the transcript and all put together for you, so you can have it in your wheelbox. Speaker slides will also be available for you after our session today. And then we would like to thank our sponsor, HonorLock, for helping make the conference possible. It's about humanizing online proctoring. If you want to chat with them, head over to their channel on our conference Slack. Now, without further ado, David Wicks.
Hi, everybody. It's good to see you all. Good to see some familiar names and faces. This is a conference that's been meaningful to me for a long time, and so it's a real honor to be able to give a presentation here that's invited. A couple of things that I learned about myself while preparing this conference presentation. First of all, the organizers can attest to the fact that it took me a long time to give them an abstract and title for the conference. They were asking me several times, and I was thinking about it, but I didn't really have in mind what I was going to say. And then when it came to me and I shared the title with them, it spurred me to then go and, I had to go find what the research, what I'd said in the past, or any kind of presentations or papers that I'd written that I could use in it. And one of the things that I found was that I had actually given in 2015 a presentation that was called Online Learning Now, Back Then, and in the Future. So I don't know if that's a form of self-plagiarism, but it kind of made me think, first of all, that I now, in my new title, I finally understand chronological order. So I straightened out the problem with having back then and now out of order. And then I'm certainly less certain about the future now. So in my previous one, I just was saying, and this is what's going to happen in the future. And now I'm kind of maybe, this is kind of what we've been through. It's a little less certain what's going to happen. The second thing I found out was, as I looked through, I realized that I have consistently over 25 years used the default setting in whatever presentation program that I use. So if I look at presentations, the ones that had any color in them and any style were always where I co-presented with someone and they took over the slides. And it just reminds me that people frequently ask me when they co-present with me is if they can have the slides if I originated them, and then they would touch them up, and they typically come back looking, of course, a lot better. The abstract was in the handout, so I'm going to skip over that. And I'm going to tell you a short history of the incomplete history of online learning, because it's just my history. It's just what I've been through. I'm not going to, things that were meaningful to me were what I'm going to share. And I think I'm not sharing my screen now, right? That's embarrassing. I've been caught many times on mute, but I don't know that I've forgotten to share my screen anytime recently. Anyway, there's my short and incomplete history of online learning from 1989 to 2022. And as we're going to start this, we are going to start with then. So what happened first? And in my mind, what started online learning was all due to Tim Berners-Lee inventing the World Wide Web. Before that time, anything to do with network technology was either all in one room or it was a bit convoluted. It just wasn't for the masses. And so once he created the web, things changed. And then the University of Rochester, when they created their online math program, that web work, which is still used today, and it's open, free to anyone. I'm not sure how it compares with other things that you can have. That's not my field, but they really helped get us started here. And then the next important event for me, at least, was in '96 when Goldberg up in Canada, University of British Columbia, created WebCT. I don't know if there are those in the room that used WebCT, but WebCT was what I first learned shortly after that time. And in fact, the next important milestone in my online learning memory is in 1998, two professors, Barbara Ennis and Peter Smith, taught online courses with WebCT, and that's how I got involved. I had come to SBU in 1998 to be a director of instructional technology, and while I thought I was going to just be helping faculty with PowerPoint, at that time it was things like Microsoft Office or something. I mean, there was the internet, but they weren't really talking about much else. And so these two professors, both near retirement, wanted to teach online courses and wanted me to figure it out. And so I did my I forgot the name of the web browser at that time. I didn't Google it. Whatever the web browser was called. I don't think I was using AOL, but I found the WebCT program, got in touch with them. They let me do a trial, and those two professors taught that year. And it was painful. They were both good with technology. They were very smart people, but they struggled using that program. It was hard for them. And all I could think of was, this is not scalable. This is not scalable. Thank you, Netscape Navigator. That's what I needed. But it was not scalable for us. And so I had to keep looking. And so it was also at that time that I really learned an important lesson that I've tried to remember over the years. Sometimes I forget it, but tried to remember. And that's the difference between digital natives and being digitally naive. And those two professors, both being 60 plus years old, near retirement age, and just people who cared about teaching and learning and wanting to do the best for their students and were willing to just dig in and put in hard work, really helped me to see that this, sometimes used expression that Mark Prensky started around that time of being either a digital native or a digital immigrant is not really a true dichotomy, and it's something we don't really even need to think about. In fact, Mark Prensky doesn't use anymore. He talks more about digital wisdom when he's thinking about this topic. But we do have people of all ages that are digitally naive, and many of them come into our classes, and they're very smart, maybe with social media or certain aspects of technology, but they need a lot of help when it comes to making good use of technology for teaching and learning. So it's important for us to keep that in mind, and was really important for me to keep that in mind, which is something I learned from those two professors. Well, the next step in my timeline was because WebCT wasn't a viable option, I kept looking and found this other program that was getting some recommendations at the time. It was called Course Info, and it was the original Blackboard. And those of you that have gotten into e-learning, online learning, maybe after 2010, Blackboard became the evil empire. But at the time, it was the most user-friendly of the options. And so that's what we started using in terms of our online courses. And it started our online master's program using that. And in terms of our instructional design, it was pretty simple. Put up a lecture, have some readings, and have some asynchronous discussion. And initially, the asynchronous discussion was pretty much write 2 posts, comment on two other posts. And so students that were quick in the draw, they were in and out of the discussion pretty quick. And those who got in late didn't get any feedback from their peers. And over the years, we made changes to that. We used peer assessment, we used self-assessment. We obviously modified our courses so that they were more friendly in terms of being made for students, so they were more active learning. And so things went along. And for me, the key to that time period, which was that lesson learned, was the importance of pilot projects and faculty feedback. If I hadn't worked with those 2 faculty, there was actually another program that was being considered at the time, and it died out faster than WebCT, but the fact that we were able to do a pilot with those faculty and get their feedback before launching it was really critical. And the reason I bring this up is because the next milestone for me was 2005, when we launched an electronic portfolio program. And that was a disaster. Maybe Debbie might remember that, but that was something where it was administratively led, in terms of there was a mandate because of accreditation that this e-portfolio system had to be in place in a short amount of time. So there was no faculty buy-in, there were no pilot projects, it was just started and ran, and it was a complete disaster. And so, you'd hope you'd learn the lesson of pilots and faculty feedback, but it doesn't always happen, and it's not always in our control. It's not always in the administration's control on these things either. So that was, again, a disaster that I'll come back to, because in a future time we were able to make changes to that. So then I'm going to jump ahead quite a bit here and talk about where we went from there. And that's where I went, which was I had an opportunity then to join the School of Education as a professor and to actually launch a online program for my own. So this was an opportunity for me to think of all the lessons we learned over the time. And I'm not taking time to go through all of those, but I would encourage you to just reflect on the lessons you've been learning. You know, when did you get into online learning? When was the first course you designed, the first course you taught? And what's changed? What have you done to reorganize that? I encourage you, if you want, to put some of those things in the chat. If you've made some changes that you think others would benefit from, I encourage you to do that. And one of the things that touched me the most as I was planning this program was as I was talking with teachers, not teachers that had been through our online master's program, but teachers who I was possibly recruiting into the program or their friends. And I didn't always know who had a master's degree or not. So when I was talking to teachers, sometimes I would hear this statement that I completed my master's entirely online and never had a personal conversation with my instructors or any other student in the program. Now, I had that conversation with multiple people, and in some cases, they were quite happy with that. It was a person who was maybe very self-directed, didn't need a lot. They would have done quite well in correspondence courses, and they just wanted the fastest path through the program. So I'm not criticizing that that's not an option that we have, and it's not something, you know, that shouldn't be a choice for some students. But I'm just saying, in this case, one student was quite proud and happy with that choice. In another case, a student was kind of telling it to me as a way, it was actually a student that then joined our program. She had completed an online master's in library science, and now she wanted to get a second master's in digital education. And she said her first one, she did not know any of the students or any of the professors. So even when she was trying to apply to our program, she was really uncertain who to contact for a letter of reference because the interaction had been so minimal. And I think that might have been kind of, you know, part of a growing stage some programs were in at the time, because they just lacked that sense of feedback. I can see that there's some, at least one post in the Jennifer sharing that was her experience, and did she like it? And she liked it, which is again, okay. That's I think we, you know, one thing we have is flexibility with some of our models. So I really then set out instead, in the quest that I was having to start an online program, was to really think about humanizing it. And if you are at all familiar with Michelle Pacansky-Brock's work, she talks about the need to humanize online learning. And that's what I wanted to work on. And so that's really where my focus is here. And I don't want to say that in a way where you know, other options aren't viable, but I wanted to make sure students had an experience where they knew their classmates and they knew their professors deeply. So, you know, she talks a lot about, you know, three things of having presence. And so we'll talk, you know, some about that, but, you know, having empathy for your students and awareness of their needs. And these are things like, you know, in terms of my teaching, I spend a lot of time on. I spend a lot of time, you know, interacting with students, and It's not efficient. It's not an efficient model at all, but it's something that I think is important, and I hope I always have the option to do it that way. I don't think that's maybe necessarily always possible or always what people choose, but that's in my case what I wanted. And that leads me to the second thing. The Garrison et al. in 2000 wrote the paper that introduced us to the community inquiry framework, and that framework has had a huge impact on my life. That's what I used for my dissertation, but it was also very critical in how I modified that original online master's program, helped to modify that, modified my own teaching. But then when I designed the program for the digital education leadership program, it's what I based everything on. So, those three circles: the teaching presence, the social presence, and the cognitive presence. Many of you are probably familiar with these, but if you're not, I'm just going to briefly describe them. So the teaching presence, is the design, facilitation, and the instruction. And so having our courses, many of our courses today are possibly designed with a team, and that's a fantastic approach. So great that we have instructional designers, that we have maybe subject matter experts other than the instructor themselves, but working together to design those courses the best way possible, and taking into consider things such as making sure that it's the cultural appropriateness of it is correct. That they've possibly thought about, well, they have thought about accessibility for people with disabilities, and just the really good instructional design that leads to clear instruction and thinking for the students. And so, just a big hats off to all of you in the room who are in those roles where you're helping design courses, or you're designing courses in any way. If you're the instructor, if you're the designer, if you're the accessibility expert, if you're the person that maybe works in like a DEI office, and you've got input on the courses, those are just such critical roles that you're playing, and just appreciate those. The social presence is really where the students make themselves known. And this is where I wanted to change things up in a major way. So in designing the courses for this new program, we made, in 2014, we said synchronous video is going to be a main element in it. So it will be, there will be a weekly synchronous meeting. We didn't want it to be a long meeting, but we wanted them to be able to interact with people in their course in real time, see each other, hear each other, have conversations. That was going to be an important piece of it. Still having the asynchronous elements, the asynchronous discussions, reflections, other things, but having an element of synchronicity. And then the cognitive presence was really the challenging part. And with Garrison, that's really where you're making the meaning. You're constructing and confirming meaning by the interactions with others and by your own reflections. And so it was critical to come up with a really good plan for how to do that. And so I'll talk a bit about the plan that we came up with. But initially, we just used the framework that Garrison had with his model, and it worked quite well. But I'll show you how I've modified that here in a second. Okay, so a major goal with this particular program was that we wanted the teacher talk to go down and the student voice to go up. And so that's when we have these synchronous meetings, and I'm doing a terrible job of modeling it today because I'm just talking to you. But in our courses, when we design the courses, we have an agenda, and the agenda includes items that force the instructor to basically just spend the time, the hour that we spend with the students in synchronous time, asking questions, facilitating discussion, but not lecturing, no direct instruction or very little. And so we use, we reserve that direct instruction element to podcasts. Anything that they feel like they want to tell the students is in a podcast. When they come together, it's a time for students to interact. And so we increase that student voice time. And that, this is again where maybe I'm showing why an example, maybe this is where I'm modeling it today, is because we have very rarely do students turn their cameras off in discussions in our courses. And it's because they sense that they're needed. They're there for a need. Now, we don't put any rules on that because we know people need privacy. People want to eat dinner. They just got home from work. They've got somebody in the background who needs privacy. Whatever their situation is, we don't ever require them to have their cameras on. But we are looking at this as a sign that they feel that their presence is needed and wanted and important in the conversations. And so they rarely have them off. And often they apologize for it, which I have to keep reminding them, no, it's not, turn it off whenever you want to. Another key part of the teaching presence is that I meet with the students every quarter. They're online, but I meet with every student every quarter for a meeting where we just go over how did it go? How's it going to go in the future? What are your goals? Where do you want to go with this program? And work with those students in that way. So, I might meet somebody in a coffee shop on Capitol Hill, or it might be in a coffee shop in Jakarta. Now, I have an unlimited budget, of course. I can spend as much money as I want, travel all over. I'm kidding. I just happen to be able to, I've had opportunities to travel abroad and had opportunities to meet and recruit students who then have led to other opportunities to visit them again in their countries. So I have a record right now of every student who's from wherever they are at in the world. I've been to their country and or their state, their city, and had coffee with them somewhere. And I want to just keep doing that because I just feel like those conversations that we're having, it's a time for me to have some possibly direct instruction, but hopefully pour into their lives and give back to them the way that my professors gave to me. And that's really my goal there. In terms of the social presence, even though it's an online program, we run it as if it was, we run it in a high flex model. So we have the real-time meetings now are both online, online and in person at the same time. And so we're using for students can say, we just have a calendar for the quarter, and they can say, I'm going to be on campus. I'll show up for a class that time, or I'm going to I'll be online. Or they can even say, hey, which just happened this last week. My wife, not me personally, but my student said, my wife's having her 50th birthday when we're supposed to have class. Is there any way I can get out of class? I said, sure. We record it. You just watch the recording and interact with the video. And, so that gives us that high flex model where they can be live in person, live synchronous, or not live asynchronous. And in terms of the technology we've used for that, we're all over the place. And what I can tell you now is the very best technology that the students like, because it works well for those online and those in the class, is everybody brings their laptop to class and they have their own video camera and everybody mutes. And then we use, I forgot the name of the speaker. I don't have my backpack right here, but we've got like a speaker for the room that's wireless. I could go grab it real quick if we need to, but because, well, I won't explain that part. Anyway, that's worked really well. And the reason we had to do that was we had international students who wanted to come in person. They wanted to be in the United States and learn, and they wanted to learn in this program. And so in order to do that, they have to spend 75% of their time in face-to-face environment in their learning. And so by having these high flex, by changing to a high flex model, that allowed us to make that happen. And so in terms of social presence, we try to take, go to conferences together if we can. And we try to include our students that are only online. We don't try to exclude them. So there's typically someone that's communicating with them, or the places we're going, they have both online and virtual options, but we're looking for ways to, have everybody come together when we go to conferences. And then we typically have graduation face-to-face, and typically, no matter where people are, they come to graduation. But of course, during COVID, we couldn't do that. So the graduation, had to be online, like I'm sure that many of you did. And that's an important piece to this, that we celebrate those students. And but I think the key to this is, when we do have graduation and our students come, when our students come together, it surprises other programs, because our students have, some of the cases, they've only met each other online, and they know each other as well or better than anybody who's come to campus face-to-face. And I feel like that's a real advantage for learning. I really think that social presence, is a key to driving the cognitive presence, which we'll jump to next. So in terms of the cognitive presence, this is the model that our courses follow. So all of our courses are inquiry-based. And so the entire course is the students trying to solve their own problems, trying to find answers to their own inquiries. And so we have content, we have standards that we're addressing, but they frame the standards and the content in terms of whatever they're doing for their work. So right now, a student who works with digitally disadvantaged students in Vietnam in an online learning to learn English, and she's looking at all of the course content through the lens of answering the questions she has about that learning environment and how she can make that learning environment better. In Arizona, we have a person who's the head of a organization that works with students who are children who are in foster care and trying to find them adoptive homes. And they provide education for the families. And so both the families doing the foster care, but also the families that are adopting. And so he's looking for ways to improve the way they do their education, because they're trying to do it digitally and it's not working for them. They just don't know what to do. So that's the kind of thing we're talking about. But this particular model, the students start with a question, and they share that question then with everybody else once they come up with it, and it's based on whatever topic we're discovering. So if we were saying that the topic was technology and creativity, then the student who's working with students in Vietnam may be looking at ways that they might use technology that's not connected to help students learn how to use, maybe creativity tools that then maybe they could, once they have connectivity, they could use as an example. But then working through these steps, these steps are completed over a 2-week time, and they complete 4 quests during a quarter. And so the second step is where they're really looking for their own resources. So they're really building their information literacy skills here by having to do searches to find the answers to their own questions. So while we do provide a reading list, students end up reading a lot more than we ask them to, because they're reading what's important to them, what they care about in their own field. And they're sharing those bibliographies back with us. So we know they're doing a lot of reading. And when they find a source that they think would benefit others, they share that back asynchronously with the group. And that's then maybe a source that others are able to use in their quest as they're going through. And this, by the way, is QUEST, the quest model, is what we have students use. Then in the educate phase, this is where they're collaborating together with each other. They're giving each other feedback, both in the synchronous environment where we're coming together, and they have professional learning communities where they discuss their questions with each other and their possible solutions for each other. And then they also share those asynchronously in the discussion area of the course. And then as far as the solution, this is where the portfolios came back in. All the students at the beginning of the program get a domain of one's own. They get their own WordPress blog and WordPress server, and they configure that and build their own website where they share whatever they're learning in the course through that means. So they share that through their solution. So after a 2-week inquiry process, they share their findings. Sometimes they have a solution, because that's the S word, so we had to come up with an S word, so I said solution. But sometimes the solution is, I just have more questions. Here are my new questions I have about this, and I need to find the answers to these questions. And then the final step is the teach one phase. And this is where we encourage them to, they're reading their peers' posts, and then we're asking them to share those posts with their PLN. So whoever they have as their network, their personal learning network, if that's in social media, if that's on Twitter, if it's teachers in the teachers' lunchroom or whatever, if it's your professional organization, but we want you to engage in conversation with others, use academic language, and find out what they think of the idea, what they would propose as a solution, and then they come back together after that. So this is really demonstrating cognitive presence. In Garrison's original model, it was called the practical inquiry model. And his was, let's see, triggering question, exploration, integration, and resolution. So there were 4 parts to it. And this is all based on work from Dewey from the past. And so here's, what ends up happening is we have this place called the EdTech Sandbox. And so we have an aggregate of all of our students' blogs, and this is over the years. So whatever they're studying at the time, whatever their inquiry was, they're sharing those findings back. And then because we use this EdTech Sandbox to aggregate all their blogs, we have this running list of what everybody's talking about. So yeah, I don't have that up, but the URL is just there if you want to go to it later. I'm going to make sure I don't run out of time here. But in some cases, students have decided not to keep their blog going. So, it's a dead link, and I sometimes clean those up, but I'm not always getting that done. So you'll probably find some dead links in that, but recent students' posts are typically there, and some have kept them over the years. What I haven't been able to do is get someone who wants to just keep blogging and blogging and blogging. And I think, to me, it's kind of like making your child do piano lessons for X years, and then as soon as they don't have to do them, they just quit. And I think that's where I got to figure that part out, because so if anybody has any ideas there, I really need those. So here's just an example of one, and I just use Ignis's post here to just show. I mean, she was interested in culturally responsive teaching, personalized learning, and how those two work together and what educators should do. And so that's the inquiry that she was on. And so if you go and read her blog post on that, you'll see where she got to. And hopefully you'll see, sometimes students comment on the blog, sometimes they comment in the learning management system. So in terms of lessons learned through this experience, I mean, I've had a blast these last years teaching these students. I mean, it's just, I just think I can't get any better students. And then a new group of them come in and they have interesting stories. They have interesting things they want to explore. And so it's really, for me, it's been a real pleasure to teach in it. And so I think, for a lot of students, they thrive in that kind of, I don't know about a lot of students. There's a group of students who thrive in this type of a learning environment. I mean, they tell me they do. They tell me how much they've learned in this space where other ways they were learning weren't as productive for them. But then we also have this idea of expansion. And maybe it isn't equity versus expansion, because there's some equity in expansion as well. But I feel like there's this tension in online learning now where, and maybe you're feeling it, where the only goal for some of those involved is growth. Like the sign of success is growth. Like you have to have a bigger program. And that is how you know that you're doing well. And I would argue that the sign of success is sustainability. And I'm not sure my program is, here for the long term. Somebody might determine that it's just not something that there's too much money spent. I'm not getting any money to travel. Those are coming out of grants or someone paying for speaking opportunities. But the the challenge for me in this is just I just don't know if I have it in me to compromise some of the things that I want to do with students to scale it to where there could be, I can have 20 students, but could I have 50 students? Could I have 60? I don't know. And so kind of that's something that kind of scares me. So I would be curious on where you're at with that. And I have to be careful about, what I say, because I think, people who have created large programs have made education available to more people at a lower price than was possible before, to more parts of the country and more parts of the world. So I can't really argue against that, but I just personally have a challenge with it. By the way, if any of you are interested in using like the Quest model or anything else that I'm doing, I'm happy to share. I've got some research going on now. I'd love to have some folks use it, other folks. We're about 15 minutes out. I don't know if we're stopping on time, and I think I'll have some time for some questions. But the other lesson learned that was through this time was on the need for resilient pedagogy. That we really have to think carefully in our design of our instruction so that we're okay. I've got 5 minutes left. Okay, that's a little more pressure. Thanks, Amy. There's this resilient pedagogy idea is something Quintana shared in 2020, but just this idea that to make courses extensible, flexible, and redundant. And one of our doc students, Katie Klum, she added these pictures, these to give us kind of a reference for each of these things so that we can remember what they stand for. But if you want to think about extensibility, it's how do we make our courses so that we can add to them if they need it? And this is, for many, they were maybe doing something with Canvas in their face-to-face course. Maybe they had their syllabus in there and they were putting their PowerPoints or something from their face-to-face class. And then the pandemic hit and they didn't know what to do. But those in the instructional technology area, those of you that are instructional designers, were able to quickly add the synchronous element to their course to make it so they could be synchronous. And so that would be an example of extensibility. The flexibility is, can you really change your course? How flexible are you to be able to change it? So can you take your 10-week course and make it 5 weeks if an earthquake hits the Northwest and your whole school is wiped out and there's no class for weeks? What are some other ways that you can be flexible and make things work differently than they need to? And then finally, the redundancy. What are you doing to provide redundant elements in your course? So, do you have, maybe you're doing something with podcasts now, but is there also a transcript? Do they have the ability to take things offline so that they don't have to be online to watch everything or do everything? Early course management systems have the ability to download the course for students. I remember seeing that as a feature for some early systems, but I don't see that anymore. And I think that would be a feature that probably should come back as a possible equity piece, but also something for redundancy. With that, let me just jump quickly with my last 2 minutes to what might be next. One thing that I've been working on is telepresence robots, using them in the classroom. And this was something I saw a number of years ago, but it was, when I asked them how much the robots were, they were like 20 grand. And so that wasn't really an option, but Omni Labs has some that were a couple of grand, and I was able to get them for cheaper than that. But we used those during the pandemic in some hybrid learning situations, because part of this challenge with hybrid is your instructors aren't super comfortable working with people face-to-face and online synchronously at the same time. And so you have to keep tweaking that model to find the best way. And so, we found this to be a possibility to use in our classes. But to be honest with you, it kind of takes us back to checking out the VCR or the overhead or the document camera from the library, or having to set up the video conferencing room. And everybody who wants to do video conferencing goes to the room. And that's kind of the model we're in now. So, maybe, maybe we can get to a point, some of the virtual reality stuff I'm not sold on yet that I've tried. And maybe somebody has better experiences with that than I do. But until we really get going, I think it's a challenge on that. So you can read more about our work with telepresence robots. We've got that going. And I think I'm out of time without even getting to what's really next. So I'll stop there. You can read what's next. It's really just some summary points, some real reflection points. So
thanks, David. I had a question.
Sure.
How were your professors trained to go HyFlex during COVID? Because that's a complex teaching method.
Yeah. So the HyFlex, we did the only thing we've done, other than I'm doing it, and it's being done in my program, and I can explain a little bit more about how that works. But the pilot we did with the robots, we had them working, but they're, for the university, in terms of HyFlex with Zoom, there wasn't really any, and it was, the IT people did it the best they could, but they're just, the rooms weren't set up for it. People were doing things like, they were using their laptop, holding their laptop up for the people that were online. I mean, it was kind of a mess. But it works in the program that I'm a part of, because every course is team taught, and often I'm the team teacher. So the other professor is somebody that I can get up to speed, or for the rare cases where I'm not a co-instructor, the people I'm working with, I trust them, and it's quick for me to share with them. It's not a huge program.
Well, thank you, David. This is a great way to start off our weekly conference. It's exciting. We have more sessions today. We have a 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, and a 2 o'clock. So the rest of you are welcome to join us. We will have all of David's slides available for you, with a lot of the links that he used for his innovative program. And Amy and I are just happy that you joined us first thing Monday morning, and hope that the rest of your week goes well.